Hello and welcome to the SCI-AI Podcast. Progress and looking into great advancement in technology is great, which my podcast always talks about in artificial intelligence, science topics. But we shouldn't ignore how certain ideologies that try to eliminate Jews from this earth or Muslims who believes kafir and they are doing Hindu genocide in many places in the world is the biggest concern, and all the world's Hindus are kind of facing it today. There are many eminent people around the world, like Sanjay Dikshit, Tariq Fateh, and many others talk about this growing concern. Among them is also Dr. Richard L. Benkin, who is a human rights activist, an author, and a speaker who has written books on Hindu genocide in Bangladesh and other places. In 2012, he has published A Quiet Case of Ethnic Cleansing: The Murder of Bangladesh's Hindus. It is a great honor and privilege to have you here, Dr. Benkin. Thank you for coming on the show.
The pleasure is mine, Vivek, and I thank you for your very kind words. I hope I can live up to them.
You will, sir. You have already inspired many millions around the world with your views. Right. So let's get started with some of the questions I have for you today.
Sure.
All the people of the world may be wondering, why is it that a human rights activist and a lecturer, professor is interested in helping Hindus' persecution in Bangladesh? What made you pursue that? What made you go to Bangladesh? How did it all start?
Well, for a number of years, I already was active on the internet with my blog posts for Israel. And one day I received an email from actually a Muslim journalist in Bangladesh who said to me, "My people don't get accurate information about Israel," referring to Bangladesh. He said, "Can you help me?" Which I absolutely was thrilled to do. And then we worked together for a while. He helped me publish in Bangladesh. I got him access to good sources. And that was going well until then. He was going to go to Israel, but he was grabbed by Bangladeshi security and taken, and ultimately tortured and charged with blasphemy, treason, and sedition, for urging Israel-Bangladesh relations and for exposing the rise of radicalism through Bangladesh's madrasas, the Muslim religious schools. His brother contacted me and said, "Please, can you help me?" And well, how do you turn your back on that? And I worked to get to free him, which I did after 17 months, even though the Bangladeshi government did not want to do that. Now, for a while, the Bangladeshi government wouldn't let me in the country to see him. After a while, they finally did, and actually, I was there during the 2007 military coup. But while I was there, I heard things about Hindus being persecuted. Then when I returned home, I had a fax. That's what we did, I guess, in 2007. I received a fax, and the gentleman said, "Hello, I'm a Hindu living near Kolkata." Actually, it was in Howrah, if I'm not mistaken. I'm a Hindu. My family brought me here from Bangladesh when I was 9. My people are dying there. Please save us. Well, again, you can't turn your back on that. And so I studied, and I realized, my goodness, even though this is not one of the genocides or things like that anyone talks about, this is just as bad, if not worse. Certainly the numbers are inconceivable for most people, the millions and millions of people, the crore.
Right.
So that's how I got involved on the one hand. But on the other hand, there was something else. Something else that got me involved in saving that journalist, but then also made it so there was no way I could be true to who I am and ignore the plight of Hindus in Bangladesh. And that's the fact is, I'm Jewish. And as a Jew growing up in the decades just after the Holocaust, or Shoah, as it's more properly termed,
Right.
I learned that, the Nazis weren't the real problem. Oh, yeah, they're terrible and all that. I mean, it's kind of easy to talk about the Nazis, but the real problem was not just the Nazis, but they could never have done that by themselves. The real problem was all the people that sat by idly while Jews were being slaughtered. And we have a phrase that comes out of the Holocaust, out of Shoah. It's never again. And it has two meanings. One is never again will we allow that to happen to us. And the second is never again will we allow people to be slaughtered and brutalized.
Right.
So that's how I got involved. And I've been involved ever since, and no doubt will be involved till the last time they close my eyes.
Right. Yep. That's a great point you've mentioned, and the reasons why you got into this. And I always believed, Richard, that only a person that has gone through that kind of pain over the generations can understand what has gone through you or through your previous generations. I mean, by an estimate, I was reading something on a website called hindugenocide.com that Aarti Agarwal manages with her team in India. By an estimate, almost about 440 million Hindus have been persecuted so far. That's a huge number. I mean, it isn't taking away about 50 million Jews that have been, killed.
But I understand that.
Yeah.
We were a small population.
Right.
Hindus are a much greater population, so that's perfectly understandable. Exactly. And I agree with you.
When I go to my friends, my Christian friends or my Muslim friends, I always tell them that perhaps you can listen to me, you can even empathize with me, but you might not be able to understand it because, again, it has not happened with your previous generations. And it's only perhaps Hindus and Jews who can understand because it has happened with them just recently. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's probably one reason why here in the United States, and where I am particularly in Chicago, Hindus and Jews have been started to work together now, and we've done some wonderful things working together.
Right. Yeah. It's an amazing partnership, and I hope it stays like that because, because all over the world, we are the ones who are constantly bombarded from all the sides by our neighbors.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. So my next question, Richard, is that after living in Bangladesh for so many years as an activist, can you please share your experience in terms of if you may have, seen genocide happening in Bangladesh and overall status of Hindus in the world as per your information? And then my question on top of that would be, how difficult was it for you to pursue your activism? Because yes, it is also a dangerous situation as an activist in a Muslim dominated country, to be able to follow that and to be able to work towards that.
Well, I'm going to start with that last question, then I'll get to the first.
Sure. Yeah.
Because a lot of people ask me, isn't this dangerous? And my response is, well, I'm kind of lucky, because after a while, I get to go back to the United States and I get to live here.
Right.
So if I face danger, it's while I'm over there. But there are people who live there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if it's dangerous for them. And it's dangerous for them much more than it's dangerous for me, because they have nowhere to go. Right. And what makes my life more viable than theirs? So that in terms of danger, the other thing I say is, so what? So what if it is? Does that mean that all someone has to do is make a loud noise and threaten us and we won't do what's right. Hopefully that's not the case.
Right.
So, what's dangerous, what's not dangerous. I mean, I do the things I know how to do to prevent danger or to reduce danger. But of course, I've had run-ins with radical groups. I've been picketed by Iranians, any number of things. Been threatened, but that means nothing, really. As I said, when you think of the people who are there being brutalized day in, day out.
Correct.
And I said they don't get to go back to the United States like I do.
Right. Yes, you're still a bit safer than them because of your citizenship. Great. Let me ask you this question then about the book, because of which I really got interested, and I was like, wow, at least somebody has seen it the way it is. So your book, A Quiet Case of Ethnic Cleansing, the murder of Bangladesh's Hindus, that you've written. Let me read an excerpt from it. After India's 1947 partition, Hindus were a third of East Pakistan's population. When East Pakistan became Bangladesh in 1971, they were less than a fifth. 30 years later, under a tenth, and today, fewer than 8%. Bangladeshi Hindus face government-tolerated murder, rape, abduction, forced conversion, land grabs, and more, including a 2009 pogrom behind a Dhaka police station. Unquote. Why do you think, Richard, this was happening? Is this the reason behind this? Is perhaps the Sharia law that they want to pursue in Bangladesh, or do you think it is Darul Islam, as it is written in their scriptures? What do you think?
That's an interesting question as to why. To be sure, one of the reasons why the government has been passive is because politically they have to patronize and keep happy the radicals, and Bangladesh is becoming more and more subject to radicalization every single day. Now, so the fact is, people think that the Awami League and Sheikh Hasina, well, they don't have to worry about radicals. Radicals are associated with the BNP. Well, that's not true. That is not true at all. Just before, as I said, I got there in 2007 and during a military coup, and just before that, Sheikh Hasina, who was head of the opposition, well, actually, there was, that was during the caretaker government, and she was the head of the opposition. And she had signed an agreement with a particularly nasty radical group, Caliphate Andalan Majlis, and she said she would bring them in their coalition if the Awami League won. Now, since then, they said, she repudiated it. Well, she repudiated it because it was to their advantage and because the elections were canceled. But there have been successive examples of the current government's ties to radicals, such as all the radicals they've put in positions of influence in the government, their patronization and including financial patronization of madrasas, including radical madrasas and things like that. So I think first we have a political situation in Bangladesh, and we have people with no sense of moral courage, no moral will to say, well, not killing people is more important than winning an election. Don't have that there. So that's one thing. The other thing, as we know, is in South Asia in particular, although it's spreading elsewhere too, there is an historical divide between Hindus and Muslims. Again, I don't want to get into that too much because I may not be the best person to talk about it. And I don't want to make more of it than I want to. However, we know that was the reason for the 1947 partition.
Right.
We know that has led to communal riots for decades. Now, whether we want to tie that to a philosophy for Sharia, that may be the case. There was a Pew study study by the Pew Research Center in 2013 that showed Bangladeshi Muslims are among the most conservative in the world. And an overwhelming number of them, I think more than 80%, want the Sharia to be the law of the land.
Yeah.
And even if they don't apply it specifically to other faiths, which is what they say, the fact that it is the law of the land makes others sort of outsiders in their own country. And it does mean that those things are still there. Anyway, so there's a real history of conflict and violence, but I think the other thing we have to be very clear about is when people do bad things, when they commit atrocities against others for being who they are, it often is because they feel they're going to get away with it. And that's what's happened in Bangladesh. There have not been very many consequences for their action. I've been able to get a few things done in Washington, but not what I need, and which is why I still fight that fight. I think the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019 was an important step, because it was the very first time any Indian government acknowledged the persecution of Hindus in Bangladesh, as well as, of course, Pakistan and Afghanistan. So we're starting to make a little progress, but I think until the Bangladeshis face real consequences for their actions, they're not going to stop, because they're not going to do the right thing just because it's the right thing to do.
Right now, they are onto a good progressive path. Their economy is doing really well post 2018, 2019, even crossing for that first year in 2020 because of perhaps Corona or other reasons, even crossed or became better than India's economy. But I think the reason behind that, like you mentioned, is imposing Sharia law and making sure that, no minorities can survive. And like you said, because of lack of education, and then more madrasas where these radical thoughts have been propagated. Because of that, the Bangladeshi population is still not so much educated as to understand what's written wrong in Quran or in hadiths, and still follow it blindly.
But I'm glad you brought up the economic situation. It actually provides a good reason why I fight so hard within the United States about this. Because you are correct. The Bangladeshi economy has had tremendous growth, even before the pandemic as well. Its growth rates outstrip those of most countries in the world. However, the Bangladeshi economy is inordinately dependent on two things, or one thing in particular, and that is the purchase of their garment exports.
Right.
If you threaten those exports, you threaten the entire Bangladeshi economy. And in fact, I think the only effective lobbying group, outside, of course, of radicals, is the BGMEA, which is Bangladeshi Garment Manufacturers and Exporters Association. They're very, very powerful, and that drives the Bangladeshi economy. Well, as I said, I focus here in the United States because who buys the greatest number of those Bangladeshi garments? And that's we here in the United States. If something happened to stop that or to reduce that seriously, that would be enough of a threat where the Bangladeshis would have no choice but to listen and do the right thing. And quite frankly, if for no other reason, because any government knows that if the economy crashes, they'll be blamed and voted out of office. So that's one thing. Now, the second thing the second reason why I lobby here in the United States about this is, as your viewers and listeners might or might not know, Bangladesh is the number one country in the world in the amount of money it receives for providing UN peacekeeping troops and other personnel. Number one. Now, for a time, Ethiopia had been given a bunch, but it's back to Bangladesh is number one again. For years, they were Pakistan were number one. Isn't that pretty interesting? Bangladesh and Pakistan. Then it just became Bangladesh. And again, Ethiopia had it for a few years, but it's Bangladesh again. They get millions of US dollars every month for this. And whose money is it? Well, mine. It's those affairs for the most. If I can convince the right people to say, we will not fund peacekeepers around, to go out of their country when there's no peace inside their country, then again, it's the sort of thing that might have an impact. In fact, I'll tell you something else. As I mentioned, I was in Bangladesh, actually in Dhaka, when during the military coup of 2007. And after the coup, I asked some of the military leaders what motivated them to do this. And I was told pretty unequivocally that we had seen, leading up to the coup, successive Western democracies taking positions that the impending 2007 elections were not going to be free and fair, which I don't think they would have been. I think they were rigged, but they're rigged again here. But in any event, and it was pretty amazing for me to watch all these democracies saying, don't hold elections.
Right.
Anyhow, at a certain point, there were enough where the military believed that the next step was for the UN to say, well, we can't have Bangladesh participate in peacekeeping because they're not a democratic country. They're not a free country. And that's why they moved. I'm sure there were other reasons, but that was the ultimate reason that led a lot of them to move against the government. So yes, these things in the past have had an impact. Again, that's why I work really hard here trying to fight this. We've made some progress, but what I run into periodically is, again, we're in the middle of an election year here, and every House member is up for re-election. Many of them are in tight primary races, so they actually have to have two elections. And so I can build up credibility, credits, support, but it's very difficult to actually get things done, and especially too when we have things like the pandemic or the Russian invasion of Ukraine, things like that, which certainly monopolize the attention of so many of the people in Washington. But that is the key.
Right. But that's a great point. And let me ask a follow-up on that then. In American politics, do they even have an ear for you? Some of the senators maybe, or some of the politicians maybe, do they have an ear for these kind of issues happening in Bangladesh or in India or in Pakistan? Or they don't care, like you said, the most burning issues are, the internal politics and the Russia-Ukraine war and rising inflation, and then, the polarization in America and stuff like that. So, what do you think?
Well, I guess a lot of people would hear what I have to say, and they'd say, gee, politicians in the United States are like politicians everywhere else. Hopefully they're not corrupt politicians, but I've run into too many times around the world. And I actually think we have enough safeguards where a few of them are corrupt. However, there are a couple things. Yes, as you mentioned, sometimes their attention is going to be focused on huge issues that are grabbing international headlines, like the pandemic, which, quite frankly, the pandemic needed that kind of a priority for it to be solved here. And our rates our rates have really gone down, but even most importantly, the intensity of the pandemic, hospitalization rates, deaths, and things like that have gone down to almost nothing in many places. So that's going to monopolize attention. We also had what was happening with the elections, and then what happened on January 6th with President Trump. That took their. And then, of course, when you have a situation like Russia invading Ukraine, which, by the way, it's not just about Russia invading Ukraine, it's about geopolitical relationships. And that if we, and it really is us ultimately, if we allow Russia to do this sort of thing with no consequences, We expect China to do it to Taiwan next.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
We also know, by the way, of course, Chinese troops have been in
Yep. South China Sea. Yep.
right, but also they've been in Arunachal Pradesh, right, AP,
Yeah.
for decades, and they'll continue to push their claims as long as someone doesn't stop them. So yes, there are those things. However, let me get and then there's the constant election cycle. For senators, it's a little easier because they only have to run every 6 years, whereas House members have to run every 2 years. However, let me also mention something else, because I am pretty familiar with the way things are in Washington with a lot of the people there. These elected officials and their staff, whether we're talking about House members or senators, I can tell you that they get hit day in, day out with people who want to talk to them about some sort of atrocity, ethnic cleansing, bigotry, and so forth. And quite frankly, pretty much all of them, almost all of them are important issues and require the sort of attention we'd like to give. However,
Right.
they can only give so much attention. And, people can only take up so many issues. So what's important for someone like me is when I go to see a member of Congress or the Senate, I need to very quickly show them why this particular issue is important, why it's important that they do something, what they can do about it, and why it deserves their attention among all of the many issues that they get hit with day in, day out. The other thing for people who, again, I don't know how it is in other countries, but in the United States, we're very focused on time management.
Right.
And I would say when you go to see a congressman or a staff person, senator, you gotta grab their attention within the first 5 or 10 seconds.
Right.
And you gotta make your first point within the first 15 or 20 seconds. And then in about another 10 seconds, you have to show why it's important for them. And then you can start making some points, but you better be concise. And that's very difficult for a lot of people. And especially, I can tell you for myself, what I really have to practice when I do this is there's so many things that I want to talk about. There's so many examples that I want to give. You really have to be very clear and say, okay, who am I seeing today and what will resonate with that person?
Modi haters or anti-India people will definitely not be liking it. And then on top of that, it's the same ideology that dictates your push towards American politics. Global dismantling of Hindutva, you might have heard of in America.
By the way, when I first started traveling into areas where people might not care for my beliefs, I made a promise to myself that I would never allow Zionism to be a dirty word, which people make it a dirty word. And I do the same thing with Hindutva. I will not stand for people trying to make it an accusation or a dirty word. In both cases, they're movements of national religious renewal. And I think you're right, Vivek. I think that people just don't want to see that. A lot of people, they just don't want to see that.
Right.
So I don't care what people think of me. I'm very proud to stand up in support of Hindutva. And by the way, another element here, people used to ask me, I'm talking about people in Washington, what should we do about South Asia? Because they're talking about Pakistan, India both being nuclear powers, or they were talking about India. And the phrase I would always use, and I'm sure in fact, I know this, that Hindus, and people in India know exactly what I mean. I would say to them, the first thing you have to do is stop treating India like a pet. India is not a pet.
Right.
It's a great
Right.
country. It's a great civilization that goes back much further than any of ours. By the way,
Yes.
including my own, which I know we're very proud.
Yes.
We Jews are very proud of being a very old religion. We're not as old
Right.
as Hinduism. So, and I think that's a problem. I think many nations in the West, particularly in Europe, you can talk about the British Raj, in Europe, and to a lesser extent, quite frankly, in the United States, see India almost as a pet. Like, well, that's good. As long as they don't get too uppity, as long as they don't hurt our interests, yeah, that's fine, But when they assert themselves, again, that's one of the things that Narendra Modi has changed for the better,
Yes.
I will say.
Yes.
That when they assert themselves and say, no, India has a rightful place in this world,
Mm.
then some people don't like that. I like it.
Right. Yes. That's a great point, Richard, because India's External Affairs Minister, Mr. S. Jaishankar, recently has done something which has which has never been done in the last 75 years of Indian independence, which is we used to go to America, we used to go in the platforms where America and other countries used to be, and our external affairs ministers, yes, used to say a few lines when they were snubbed by America or other countries. But here is Mr. S. Jaishankar, who said, when talked about the human rights issues, for minorities in India, he said, well, don't worry about us. I am more concerned about the human rights in America. And that was like giving us so much pleasure, because it was the first time in our independent history that somebody has the courage to say that without fearing about, hey, America will put sanctions on us, or hey, it'll not be good for us, our bilateral relations.
Correct. And I must tell you, I mean, we could go into more extended discussion about,
Sure.
why this is okay and that's okay. But
Yeah.
what I find really, really important about what he did is he's saying, look, this doesn't mean that we don't think America is a great country or a great friend.
Right.
We just want you to know that we can pontificate with equal authority that you can pontificate, because I doubt that India would actually do something like that. But the fact is, I think it's an important point. As I said, we can get into more detail, which I'm sure is not, I mean, it's really not germane to our discussion today.
No. Yes.
About it. But I think the example you gave me, Beck, that's so good, it is a matter of Indian official asserting
Yes.
the authority and the greatness of the country of India.
In your book, you've written about the fact that if the persecution of Bangladeshis Hindus do not stop, it will be doomsday. I mean, I'm not quoting verbatim, but
That's okay.
that's what you meant, perhaps, is it will be doomsday for America and India both. Can you please explain that to everybody? And I want to spread this message to everybody in the world.
Sure. Let me first mention something very quickly.
Sure.
One of Bangladesh's most respected scholars, who has done tremendous detailed work on all of these things,
Right.
Dr. Abul Barkat from Dhaka University, has said that if things don't change, there will be no more Hindus in Bangladesh. And he gave a certain number of years, which would mean by mid-century. Now, it might or might not be that long, but I think it's a very important point. And as I said, Dr. Barkat is extremely knowledgeable and highly respected. And I have a great deal of respect for him as well. So I believe in what he says. Also, because of what I've seen, I believe in what he says. Now, why do I say is it doomsday for the rest of us? And I say the same thing, by the way, about if Israel's abandoned. It's the same thing.
Right.
Because if we tell the enemies of freedom that we will not stand up and protect the world's largest democracy, the only democracy in the Middle East, and the only and the countries that most represent a peoples who are otherwise so often brutalized. I think if we do that, we're sending them a message. Let's do more of it. And as I said, ultimately, that comes to our shores. And besides the fact, we should do these things because they're the right thing to do, not because it's going to have an impact on us. But be that as it may, yes, I think people don't recognize why it's important to stand up for what's right, for freedom, and what the consequences are if we don't. And by the way, I think that's why there was so much focus on Russian invasion of Ukraine. Russia had to know that they weren't going to romp through this like they did when they took the Crimean Peninsula.
Yep.
So same thing. Not only that, many years ago, when my hair was still dark, I said that the only hope for our planet is a grand alliance between the United States, India, and Israel, and I still believe that.
Correct.
I still believe that. Because we are democracies, we sometimes are going to have leaders who don't buy into these things, and I think we're all going, well, India is not. India has a strong leader who believes in these things, and also who evidently, and to his credit, believes that this is important when there's a strong India, not when there's, like I said before, a pet or a junior partner who's taking a long time. You see, all these countries have relationships with countries that the others don't. India has a decent relationship with Iran, which the United States and Israel do not. Israel has a decent relationship actually with China that the United States does not. And whatever relationship India sometimes have with China, we know what Chinese designs are for India. If someone can show me, now I will make one exception. And I know Pakistan has declared them not to be Muslim, but Ahmadiyas, you know?
Ahmadiyas, yes.
They said they could use protection, you know? But as I said, in Pakistan, they've been declared by the government as not being Muslim.
Exactly, right. So can you please share your views about the anti-Hindu organizations, like, at least I believe them as anti-Hindu, USCIRF, that are slowly and steadily building this vile narrative against India and Hindus in America by, raising funds and creating this dangerous trend in America by pushing that narrative, and somehow New York Times and Washington Post and all sort of help that narrative by spreading that message. What is your take on it?
Well, first of all, as far as the New York Times and Washington Post and groups like that, yeah, we Jews deal with that too. And Israel is demonized the way India is demonized.
Oh my God.
Very much the same way. So I not only can understand that, and I certainly can understand that given my closeness with Hindus, but I can also empathize, not just empathize, I can empathize as a Jew and as a Zionist for that. So I would say this, first of all, the USCI, U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF, I believe, and I have much longer discussion, but in other form, I will have the figures to show people, but I believe that USCIRF is hopelessly biased. And if you look at its 22-year history, it has never even once recommended that a country be sanctioned as a country of particular concern, or CPC, never even recommended it, unless there were Muslim or Christian victims.
Right.
I remember this last time when it recommended India again, which, by the way, the U.S. State Department, to its credit, has rejected every recommendation to declare India a country of particular concern, and that has been under Republican and Democratic presidents, including the current administration, because it's just not true. I believe there is a bias against non-Abrahamic religions, as I say, again, a bias against faiths that do not worship God with a capital G. I think that's part of it. And by the way, they're biased against non-Abrahamic faith plus the first Abrahamic faith, because like I said, I started to say in their most recent recommendations, one of the reasons they recommended India to be a country of particular concern was laws of anti-cow slaughter laws. Okay.
Right.
Now again, that's another long discussion. I got to tell you, I've photographed, I've videoed smugglers smuggling cattle from India across the river to Bangladesh, and myself actually chased them. Because I got to tell you, the Indian BSF wouldn't do anything. They might help the smuggler. But in any event, so they said anti-cow. Oh, it's terrible. Besides the fact, as I've told people, oh, it's terrible. You can go throughout India, and if you want beef, and I don't eat meat, but if you want beef, you can get it. You can see it hanging in shop windows. If you want to get, I remember passing street vendors selling you beef biryani. Right? Okay, it's not. Yeah, so it doesn't mean that you can't get beef to carry out whatever you think you need to carry out. But I've also said, well, tell me, if this is a reason to censure a country, then I want to know why USERF has not even once,
right,
recommended a European country be sanctioned for outlawing Jewish ritual slaughter, which is an offense against my religion. They're hopelessly biased. Again, the strength. Another problem we have in the United States is that I say when I fight this, I have a special problem. There was one time when I thought, okay, the people who were favoring like the Bangladeshis and that whole, they were on the left, so I could go. I was fine. I knew how to fight the left. But then the evangelical Christians adopted a narrative that India is harming Christians. And so now I have to fight this on the left and the right. It's not impossible, but it is something. It's two things. It makes the fight against it a little more difficult, although there are people that don't care about these supporters. But besides that, it means that there are so many powers that be who can keep pushing this narrative, and then even if it's totally bogus, totally false, if you keep saying it again and again and again, then people use that to build a case, to build other things. Then other people, even if it's not true, well, they react as if it is. We're not the only place where that happens. I know everyone's seen that. Two things. One is that the Hindu population is becoming a greater political force in this country. And quite frankly, that means it's a force you can't ignore. Now, again, to be sure, we've talked about some of the issues and the problems with that. And we're also seeing, as I was involved with in Chicago, greater Hindu-Jewish cooperation. And that means a lot. And in fact, many of the people in Washington I talked to about the Bangladeshi Hindu issue, I originally got to know because of my advocacy for the U.S.-Israel relationship. So there's a real tie there. And I think those two things make me a little more hopeful that we can get things done here. But again, that is a special problem that we have, the left and the right who are pushing this false narrative.
That's true. The left and the right in America is still not taking India that seriously. But I mean, that's where, people like yourself and the different Hindu organizations which are working with other Jewish organizations are taking and building that narrative, so that, because it's at the end of the day, it's a narrative war. I mean, you don't have to do anything specifically on the ground from you.
Vivek, the pleasure was mine, and thanks, man. I have to say, because it's what you're doing, what others are doing is so very important to help spread this narrative. Again, I think we could use more acting, but that's all right. I will say one last thing about Jews and Hindus. Yes, we have common enemies. Yes, we have common interests, but besides that, we also have common values.
Correct.
And one thing about Jews and Hindus that a common value that we have that actually makes things a little more difficult for people like me, but I'll deal with it,
Hmm.
is too many members of our community look at others
Right.
and feel, well, we must help others, we must do for them, but they will do that at the expense of their own community. Same again, whether it's India or Israel, same thing. Whether it's Hindus or Jews, same thing. So I think it's a wonderful value. I really do. We do have, there is one old ancient expression. I'll give you the English instead of Hebrew. It goes like this from a great sage: if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am
Yes.
only for myself, what am I? And if
Yes.
not now, when? I think it's a beautiful sentiment, and I hope it's something we all live by.
Fantastic. That's a great way to wrap it up. Had a great time discussing this with you. Let's do it again when your schedule permits. Whatever you do, we are a big fan in Sweden, in India, in America of your work. Believe me, a lot of podcasters talk about you, reference your books, and what
Really?
you're talking. Yes, yes, absolutely. That's how I got to know about yourself and reached out to you. So please continue to do that. We are always with you, and hopefully we will connect again. Thank you, Richard. You have a great day.
Thank you very much, Vivek.